it's not. Professor the Honourable Dame Murray Bashir, Vice-Chancellor and Principal of the University of Sydney, Dr. Michael Spence, President of University Colleges Australia, Ms. Rose Ormond, and colleague heads of colleges from around Australia, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kinross Mackey Chapel this evening for the occasion of the Sesquicentenary Lecture, a highlight of a remarkable calendar of events marking the 150th year of the founding of the College of St Andrew within the University of Sydney. I wanted to extend a particularly warm welcome to our special guest lecturer this evening, Associate Professor Rufus Black, the Master of Ormond College at the University of Melbourne. I'll introduce Rufus properly shortly, but before I do, some context. The centenary of St Andrews 50 years ago was of course the cause for much celebration, and the programme events in that important year in the life of what was then a Presbyterian college for men included an address by former Governor of Victoria, Davis McCackey, who at the time of our college's centenary was the Master of Ormond College. Ormond, Andrews, Emmanuel from the University of Queensland, and Knox College from the University of Otago formed the great Presbyterian Colleges Alliance of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And whilst all great university colleges must adapt and change over time, there remains in each a deep commitment to a shared heritage formed by our common roots in the Scottish Enlightenment. The illuminated address on my left was presented to the Reverend Dr. Andrew Harper by the students of Ormond College, where he taught divinity, upon his departure to take up his post as principal of this St Andrews College in 1901. I'm delighted, therefore, because of these deep connections, but for many reasons more, that Rufus has agreed to present the Sesquicentenary Lecture tonight. Rufus is an alumnus of Ormond with an interesting twist. He was in residence while he pursued degrees in politics, economics and law at the University of Melbourne. He returned to Ormond from Oxford as chaplain of Ormond in the late 90s, having completed a diploma in theology, a master's in philosophy and his doctorate in philosophy, reading moral theology and ethics at Keble College in Oxford, following the award of the Rhodes Scholarship in 1991. Finally, and presently, he is of course the Master since 2009. In this place, Rufus, that will be regarded as a frequent flyer status. Before accepting the role as Master of Ormond, he was a partner at McKinsey, where he worked for 9 years throughout Asia and Australia, and we welcome some of his McKinsey colleagues here tonight. He is a Principal Fellow in the Department of Philosophy and also the Department of Management and Marketing at the University of Melbourne. He is Deputy Chancellor of Victoria University, the President of Museums Victoria, and a Director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, where he chairs the Human Research Ethics Committee. He is on the board of Innovation and Science Australia, a Director of the law firm Cause Chambers and Westgarth, and co-founder of the Wade Institute of Entrepreneurship. He is the founding chair of the board of Teach for Australia and is an emeritus director of Teach for All, the US equivalent. He is a member of the advisory board of the McDonald Centre for Theology and Public Life and a director of CEDA, the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. He has published on many topics, including economic development, unemployment, the ethics of using stem cells, and the life changes of Generation X, to name a few. He has contributed enormously to public policy in Australia, including work for hospital and healthcare reform commissions, for the Commonwealth Department of Defence, where he authored the Black Report into accountability and governance in the department, the recommendations of which were incorporated in the Defence White Paper. He has been a strategic advisor to the Secretary for Education in Victoria since 2012, and for the Prime Minister's independent review of the Australian Intelligence Committee. And whilst he might take some questions at the conclusion of the lecture, don't ask him any questions about that. Rufus brings together the unusual combination of a deep academic background in ethics with practical leadership expertise across the private, public and social sectors at both executive and governance levels. He once described residential colleges as the monasteries of the 21st century. He once wrote about educating the millennial generation for the challenges of the 21st century. He is an educator, an ethicist, a theologian, and strategic thinker, but clearly so much more. In the eyes of many, including my own, he is the outstanding thought leader in university colleges in Australia today. Ladies and gentlemen, to discuss the role of the college in the 21st century Australian university, please welcome Associate Professor Rufus Black.
Thank you very much, Wayne, for that very generous introduction. Certainly, as Wayne said, the friendship between our two institutions has been long and personal, as long and personal as our common heritage in the Scottish Presbyterian communities of colonial Australia. And as Wayne mentioned, in recognition of that shared history, my predecessor, Professor Davis McHattie, did join you on the occasion of your 100th anniversary, and your third principal indeed came from Ormond. The connections have been many and warm, so it was certainly a great honour to be invited by my very good colleague Wayne Erickson to join you in celebrating the 150th year of this remarkable college. In the years since St Andrew's foundation, our two colleges have turned the education oxymoron of a Scottish university residential college into a thriving model that has much to offer the future Australian higher education. It is that story and the possibility and its possibility that I want to explore this evening. There is something very different about the model of St Andrews and Ormond as colleges, as is hinted at in the reference we still make to our origins. St Andrew's description of itself, which you have made prominent in this 150th year, is the talk of a college being born of the Scottish Enlightenment. In similar vein, at Ormond, we talk about our foundations being in the values of the Scottish Enlightenment. These are very different routes to colleges with Church of England foundations. As the Anglican colleges of the universities of Sydney and Melbourne are fond of noting, they are either the first, as St Paul's proclaims proudly on its website, or the oldest, as Trinity notes in Melbourne. While Scots have always had a wry smile for English claims that with age rather than merit comes rank, when it comes to colleges, it is no surprise that they were founded earlier. Those Anglican ancestors of today's venerable colleges had a clear model to follow in the institutions of Oxford and Cambridge. Presbyterians were never just going to transplant that very English vision. As historian Don Chambers observes, for Scots, the concept of university college was not only English and therefore alien, but savoured of an Oxbridge aristocratic decadence which conflicted with the Presbyterian educational austerity. St Andrew's history records, with I think rather Scottish understatement, nor did all Presbyterian layfolk and ministers see the need for a residential college at all. Most ministers had been educated at Scottish universities where there were no comparable colleges. Those suspicions of colleges ran deep. The prominent and popular Presbyterian minister, the Reverend G. Mackey, wrote to the newspapers in the 1870s opposing our era collegiate system, saying a university or college residence is not desirable at all. They have been at foul blots upon the great schools of England. Multitudes of young men have to date had their ruin in these residential establishments. They have learned a smattering of a few things, an immense amount of snobbery and profanity. Such establishments are wholly unnatural. In Victoria, the age, even less friendly to colleges back then than they are now, waged a campaign against the affiliation of Trinity College with the University of Melbourne. It attacked colleges as the home of cliques, inefficiency, and associated with a dead past. Many Presbyterians supported that campaign. The high this rhetoric about the impact on character, of the English model of colleges, lay a more profound set of philosophical divides about education. These are the differences we both speak about when we identify our roots in the Scottish Enlightenment. But the story of that difference begins far earlier in the medieval and Renaissance origins of universities, where England had Oxford and Cambridge, and Scotland, between 1410 and 1593, 4 great universities developed: St Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Edinburgh. With the coming of the Reformation, these universities evolved a culture that enabled a freer and more radical exploration than was possible south of the border. In time, they would become cradles of the Enlightenment, and Scotland would produce what, with few rivals, was the most educated population in Europe. These Scottish institutions were very different from those of Oxford and Cambridge, and 3 distinctions stand out. They were open and not sectarian. Unlike Oxford and Cambridge and their colleges, there was no religious test to attend them. You didn't have to be a member of the Church of England or of any church. Indeed, they were open to people of all faiths or none. And while not sectarian in access, theology, of course, was still taught, and it took its place alongside other subjects. Secondly, they were progressive. While classics was still valued, it took its place alongside the modern subjects of the sciences, medicine, European languages, and contemporary philosophy. Universities saw themselves as providing, and not just an education, but preparing people for commercial and public life as well. And finally, they were accessible. Until the late 19th century, anyone could attend these universities. There was no entrance test or requirement. Students weren't required to live in university establishments, and there was a system of bursaries to assist poor students. The educational model that enabled those values was a lecture-based one, in notable contrast to Oxford's tutorial system. Now, developing in parallel to the Scottish institutions in England in the 19th century was the University of London, which was set up as a secular alternative to Oxford and Cambridge. It drew on the positive experience of the Scottish model, but was avowedly secular. Both provided a model of open access, lecture-based systems that provided a touchstone for the evolution of the colonial universities in Australia. Watching the evolution of a system in sympathy with their own educational perspectives, the Scots of colonial Australia saw no pressure to create anachronistic English-like colleges. So if there were to be colleges of a Scottish Enlightenment foundation, they would need to be built on a different model, one that grew out of their beliefs about education, that was open, progressive and accessible. Now, history records more explicitly the conscious creation of such a model in Ormond's case. So I would use that parallel story to draw out the deeper points about the nature of this unique synthesis that formed these early Presbyterian Scottish institutions. In Victoria, what forced the Scots to decide whether or not to create a college was that very English threat to take their land. In 1877, the Royal Commission on Education recommended that either churches establish colleges on the land they had been given, or sell it with the proceeds going half to the church and the other half to fund the scholarship scheme to the university. What led the Scottish founders to embrace the idea of a university college was paradoxically the result of the leadership of an Englishman. This pivotal but largely forgotten figure was Herbert Augustus Strong. He could see a fusion of Scottish and English models, something truly Australian. It was his personal history that gave rise to that vision. Born in 1841 in Devon, England, son of an Anglican clergyman, academically he went on to read classics at Corpus Christi College, Oxford, and then in a career development, a great moment for his future role in Australia, he was appointed in 1866 as the Assistant Professor of Humanity at the University of Glasgow. There he came to appreciate the Scottish model of education, embrace its progressive agenda, and understand the ways of the Scottish community. And during that time, he was briefly warden of Glasgow's University Hall, and so came to acquaint himself with communal student living that was not collegiate in an Oxbridge way. Strong came to Australia in 1871 to the University of Melbourne as a professorship in classics and comparative philology and logic. Not long into Strong's time at the university, the debate erupted about the affiliation of Trinity. He waded into the debate, arguing the age that it was not wise to leave them not near such accommodation to sectarian establishments like Trinity College. He did more than object. He became a great advocate for an alternative model, a new synthesis of Scottish and English traditions. His own liberal Christianity and experience in Scotland convinced him that education should never be sectarian in the ways of Oxford and Cambridge. He saw the power of the lecture-based system that he'd been involved in at Glasgow, but equally he thought Scottish students had missed out by not being exposed to peer-based education and personal tuition. At an institutional level, he experienced and worried that a lecture-based system placed unrealistic demands on lecturers because teaching at that scale meant they could never adequately respond to individual student needs, something deeply modern in that observation. Something he thought which was central to education. He imagined that he could bring both traditions, that it was possible to bring both traditions together in a college. That was an integral part of a university. Strong believed in students and scholars being active members of the same community. It was a notion that came up with since he went to school at Winchester College, where scholars and students lived in the same community, and that he then found in Oxford. And he led by example in this regard, playing football for the university alongside students and encouraging athletics and debating. And he was in time one of the earliest tutors to live in residence. So connected and respected in the Scottish community, thanks to his time in Glasgow, he saw this project of the Presbyterian College as the vehicle for this vision. Now we know little of the way Strong made his case, but when the Scottish Presbyterian community were galvanised into a creative college, the idea for the sort of college that emerged was Strong's. And he would be one of 6 founding members of the college's council, taking his place alongside 5 Scottish Presbyterians. In many ways, the readiness of Scots to create this new synthesis for a new land was typical of the culture that had made the Scottish education system so dynamic, and that meant that it was ready to give place to Enlightenment ideas in a Calvinistic climate. Strong's legacy for Australian colleges is, in lots of ways, extraordinary, that he was able to frame that synthesis so clearly and for so many. The result was that when that college opened, it was, in the words of its founders, open to people of all faiths and none. It lived up to that non-sectarian aspiration. It was a college that welcomed both Catholic and Jewish students. It was progressive, and it embraced and made central accessibility to modern languages and sciences and modern philosophy, and it was accessible with 30 students on scholarships. This idea of synthesis was very much a conscious project, and one was explicitly recognised at the time when Ormond's first master, John McFarlane, was receiving an honorary doctorate. The University of Melbourne's documentation supporting his doctorate said, in these affiliated colleges, the problem of uniting the lecture system of the Irish, Scottish and German universities with the tutorial system and social advantages of residents found in Oxford, Cambridge and Dublin has been successfully solved. So wherever our 2 colleges might go over the next 150 years, the synthesis from which they were born offers a model which I think can be of great value to the future of higher education in Australia. And in characterising the Australian college synthesis of today, I'd identify 4 characteristics. Now whether either of our colleges or others have these qualities today is a matter really for others to judge. But that we or other colleges could have these characteristics is a matter of choice. And those characteristics of this kind of synthesis of colleges born of the Scottish Enlightenment is first that they are in the fullest sense place-based collegiate learning communities, and I'll say more about what that means shortly. Secondly, they have a distinct education agenda, just as the Scottish founders of St Andrews and Ormond had clear educational perspectives born of their Presbyterian and Scottish Enlightenment origins. Further, they have a nature, capability and commitment to work in partnership with their universities to create an integrated educational offering while maintaining their own education agenda. And fourth, as private institutions, they're accessible in ways that can work with models of access of state-based universities. So what does this model have to offer the future of higher education? From where I view a college, I do so from a number of vantage points of a higher education landscape. Certainly from being the head of a college affiliated to the University of Melbourne, but also as Deputy Chancellor of Victoria University, a university with a very different kind of mission. As a former member of the Juror Committee that advised the government on its higher education policy, and as a former strategic advisor to the Secretary of Education in Victoria, that had to weigh the questions of the future of our universities. When we look at our Australian higher education system, it is impressive in many ways. It has scaled up to educate just about everyone who might have an appetite for higher education. It's a productive system. It provides high quality education to a large number of people, very cost effectively for the quality it produces. It's a remarkably equitable system. The HECS and helps students provide universal access, but avoid the unfairness of cross-subsidising private benefit from the public purse. And the research output it produced benchmarks very well with the best systems around the world. However, there are considerable issues. Given the context of today's lecture, let me just reflect on issues from educational rather than research or engagement perspective, where there are also major opportunities for improvement. And these observations I want to make don't come so much as criticism, but rather a description of the state that you would entirely expect given the policy and funding framework of Australian universities face. I think there are three categories of issue: the nature of the pedagogy, the narrowness of the educational project, and the lack of choice around curriculum and the type of institution that you could attend. And to flag where I'll head, I'll argue that the Australian college model that I've described can play an integral role in helping universities in the 21st century in Australia respond to each of these challenges. Now, let me start with the nature of pedagogy. For undergraduates on campus, the pedagogical model is fundamentally teacher and transmission centred, and that's only worsened in recent times. Lectures have grown to hundreds, and although with many available as downloads, numbers quickly dwindle as students receive transmission in the comfort of their own homes. That only creates further kinds of problems. Group learning has grown to an average size of 20 plus in most Australian universities, but still in what risks being false advertising and goes by the name of tutorials in some places. There are, of course, some group tasks, especially in engineering, architecture and design faculties, but there is rarely the attention to creating the social ecology or team-based skills that enable a real shift in the pedagogical model to occur. The use of downloaded and online material combined with students living at home needing to do substantial paid work and the decline of the life of clubs and societies on campus means that many students' education is not essentially place-based or peer-focused. University campuses are just one place among a number in their lives. And if we turn to the narrowness of the offering, universities make no serious attention to a broader educational project in values or character, nor are they structured or have substantive programs designed to explicitly help young people with a broader project of navigating the transition to adult life, beyond providing services if they aren't going well, and these are being progressively scaled back under cost pressures. And finally, to choice. In terms of providing choice as the type of institution, we have a regulatory framework that has produced the least diversified higher education system in the OECD. With the exception of a truly tiny Campion College, we have nothing like a liberal arts college, nor at the other end we have a Caltech, with it's less than 1,000 undergraduates, not many more graduates, with 34 Nobel Prize winners. When it comes to curriculum choice, the lack of institutional diversity also underpins a homogeneity of education approach. Undergraduates offer discipline-based courses in a traditional faculty structure. There are minimum structured liberal arts offers. Humanities programs typically have gaping holes in their coverage of Western civilization, and the opportunity for real research essentially has to wait until the honours year. Interdisciplinary inquiry at an undergraduate level is often not a lot more than a serial presentation of material by people from different faculties, and true group-based exploration, experiential problem-solving and design thinking barely exists before us. Now, it's true that the Melbourne model, which has been followed only by UWA really, has introduced some welcome choice, but it really belongs to the category of the exception that proves the rule. And significantly, there is no real pressure to address these student-centred issues. Central to what keeps these issues out of the chancelleries and council chambers is that students appear overall to be relatively satisfied with the transactional bargain that is higher education in Australia. The best data we have comes from the Student Experience Survey, and it tells us about 80% of students are satisfied with the overall experience. Focus on those numbers, as Vice-Chancellors and University Councils do, and there is little imperative to focus on these questions, especially faced with the more obviously pressing challenges of funding, research performance and engagement. However, if we dig into these numbers a little, they suggest a long-term strategic risk is building. To start with, most of what drives the 80% result are high levels of satisfaction with skills attained, resources available, and teacher quality, which largely means quality lecturers. In a world where graduate employment rates are falling, funding coming under pressure, and students abandoning lecturers, there are strong pressures that could bring all of these scores down. And even if we were comfortable with those numbers, they are still a good 10 points below many comparable universities in the United States and the United Kingdom. Clearly, it's possible to do better. At a minimum, that should be also of concern because those international universities are the strongest competitors in the market for international students. Second, and I think more importantly, hidden in the 80% composite score is the fact that learner engagement is around 60%, and until they changed the questions a few years ago, it used to be around 50%. It turns out that those satisfaction scores themselves are composite answers to questions which come together quite a bit and very much. And quite a bit is hardly profound satisfaction. If we then look at what these learner engagement questions actually cover, it is the peer group, personal and place-based dimensions of education. When I list these questions that are covered, remember that 40% of students answer not at all, very little or some to each of these questions, whether they have participated in discussions, online or in person, worked with other students as part of your study, interacted with other students very different from you. 40% are effectively saying no or not much to that. Interacted with students outside the study requirements. 40% barely a ringing affirmation of that. Had a sense of belonging to your institution. These questions go to far more than engagement. These are measures around the opportunities students are getting to become skillful in ideas-centred interpersonal interactions, engage in team-based problem-solving, harness diversity, and build networks. These are the very skills that are widely seen as central requirements if you are to be one of the value creators in the 21st century economy and to have the capabilities not to be left behind. At a minimum, there is a clear opportunity to improve the experience of students. More seriously, a failure to do so may leave them without the skills that are a priority in the increasingly unforgiving global economy. And we're already seeing there's signs of that unforgiving economy reaching the realm of the tertiary educated as graduate employment rates fall from the 90% range that they were in the early 2000s to the 60% range today for those in the year after university. Now, underpinning these issues is the first weakness which the Australian higher education system identified, and that's around pedagogy. And it is here that the Australian model of colleges offers a complement of real significance. The starting point is that colleges begin with a different pedagogy. A college pedagogy is built around inquiry-driven, community-based, peer-to-peer learning. Instead of the one-to-many model, it is the many-to-many model of learning. The traditional touchstone for discussion of the nature and merits of such a pedagogy is the famous passage in John Henry Newman's The Idea of University, when he writes, "If I had to choose between a so-called university which dispensed with residence and tutorial superintendents and gave its degrees to any person who passed an examination in a wide range of subjects, and a university which had no professors or examinations at all, but merely brought a number of young men together for 3 or 4 years and then sent them away. If I were asked which of these two methods was the better discipline of the intellect, if I must determine which of these two courses was more successful in training, moulding, enlarging the mind, which sent out men more fitted for their secular duties, produced better public men, men of the world, men whose names, you have to forgive me his gender language, whose names would descend to posterity, I had no hesitation in giving preference to that university which did nothing." When he asked himself the rhetorical question, how is this to be explained, he answered, "When a multitude of young people, keen, open-hearted, sympathetic and observant as young people are, come together and freely mix with each other, they are sure to learn from one another, even if there be no one to teach them. The conversations are poured as a series of lectures to each, and they gain for themselves new ideas and views, fresh matter of thought and distinct principle for judging and acting day by day." In this memorable piece of polemic, Newman intuits the power of what we come to know as peer-to-peer inquiry-based learning. Very importantly, and often missed, he didn't think this was some kind of state of nature, but rather required a particular kind of community to be developed. Such a community, he argued, will embody a specific idea, it will represent a doctrine, it will administer a code of conduct, and it will furnish principles of thought and action. It will give birth to a living teaching, which in the course of time will take the shape of self-perpetuating tradition. As part of the Melbourne College's engagement with its very supportive university, I was asked to describe what we meant by a college, because there was a danger, if you've only read Newman's first passage, that you could think the essence of a college was accommodation, and therefore any accommodation of university students could deliver much of the good of colleges. This is dangerously false logic. The following is a definition which we all agree captured what Melbourne colleges considered to be a collegiate type of community that Newman was describing. Colleges are intentional communities. They form their community through the selection of members and their distinctive customs and educational offerings. They take their sense of being a society with clear expectations so seriously that they may even ask people to leave who do not live within the letter and spirit of those expectations. Colleges are intentional academic communities committed to the overall development of their students. And central to the identity of colleges is the advancement of the academic potential of their members. Integral to their communities are both students and academics who engage formally and informally to promote the learning of students. Completing their work in forming intellects, colleges see as central to the task of forming people as rounded individuals equipped to make positive contributions to their societies. Colleges are place-based institutions. They believe that coming together in a physical place is essential to creating the depth of relationship and trust that constitutes a college community. Therefore, they have spaces specifically designed to enable community to come together. Colleges are communities that share a common life, and for colleges that life is expressed and shaped by regularly dining together. Colleges are committed to having members on the basis of merit rather than means, so all work to make themselves accessible through scholarships and other forms of financial assistance. The fees they charge are not a fee for service or a commercial transaction, but one of the forms of contribution that are made to maintain that community. Alumni, friends of the college and others also make contributions, financial and otherwise, to support them. And colleges exist for the mutual benefit of their members, so they never have shareholders and they are not run for the benefit of others. Colleges are communities shaped by their evolving narratives, customs and traditions. Those practices are valued because they're an important part of how a college passes on from one generation to the next. Now, in making the case for the capacity of colleges to contribute to the future, let me pause for a moment to reflect that to create and evolve just the kind of communities I have described, to have such richness, is no easy leadership task. We have seen the William Golding-esque bad island cultures of contemporary residential life come under the spotlight here in Australia and around the world. And often through those inquiries we get glimpses into the archipelago of bad islands that continue to grow in the social media world and then metastasize out into the material world. At times like this, there is always a temptation to see such projects as inherently flawed or too difficult to solve. But this is precisely the moment not to lose our nerve. The task of leadership in times like these is to assert the substantiveness of what a college is about, as I have just sought to do, and not to allow it to be defined by an unhealthy cocktail of traditions that reflect an understanding of social relations long recognised as at best limiting of human development and at worst concealing of egregious violations of human decency. On the basis of a substantive account of the nature of a college, it is possible to engage in transformational rather than transactional leadership. And here we have no better guide for this task than Ronald Heifetz at Harvard, and his insights into what it takes to uphold a community to the transformational questions and to support them to evolve towards those answers that emerge from the very heat of working on those challenges. Now, I think adding to the degree of difficulty that all of us face in evolving the colleges of the 21st century is the sort of leadership that requires is the current media world, which has no place for the complexities of change, whose attitudes to colleges have changed little since the Age campaign against them more than 100 years ago. But don't get me wrong, there's no complexity about being clear that sexual violence and other forms of violence have no place in the community, let alone colleges, whose healthful fabric can be measured by the level of trust people have in one another. But the broader task of change can be complex, especially in a world where the incoming tide of popular culture brings much that is unwelcome and unhealthy to good communities. Deep and lasting cultural change takes a little time, and unfortunately the moments of inevitably failing when engaging in the process of helping young people through the transition from adolescence into responsible adulthood, whenever that fails, it provides fuel for eye-catching outrage. The paradox is that the response the media often pay for, of greater policing, of ever more restrictive codes of conduct, is exactly what will prolong adolescence rather than end it. While young people engage in the world based on external rules set by the authority of others, rather than shifting to a locus of control based on their personal embrace of a set of values that create a healthy community that they choose to live by and care about, there will be little progress towards the sort of environment humans saw as central to a truly collegiate education and collegiate pedagogy. We need to recognise the importance and challenge of this task, because it requires a very different form of leadership that is needed in other parts of the Australian university. This is community leadership in challenging times. It is at once a task of politics, pedagogy and pastoral care. It is around the clock and it is semester long. With that kind of leadership, however, we can create the type of rich collegiate environment where the task of complementing the pedagogy of the university is possible. So how does the university environment in the 21st century do that? First, it provides the setting that the university curriculum can be pursued through peer-to-peer learning. Tutorials in colleges should really be seen in a collegiate setting as a way of shaping the self-directed and peer-to-peer project every bit as much as a structured and genuinely small group learning experience. Second, the strong peer-to-peer environment brings rich opportunities to develop the critical 21st century skills which they report not getting developed to such an extent on campus. Being skillful in ideas, centred interpersonal interactions, engaging in team-based problem solving, harnessing diversity, and building networks. And just as an aside, because when you mention networks and college in the same sentence, it can conjure up notions of advancement through personal connections rather than merit. I want to note that this is not what I mean at all. Rather, networks and the ability to have them is about belonging to a group of people with sufficiently shared values and levels of trust that when it comes to solving problems that require a diversity of people, the foundations exist for collaboration to occur that might not otherwise happen, or only with considerably greater transaction costs. Anyway, this collegiate environment provides, I think, the foundation not only for creating better pedagogy, but also for addressing the second weakness identified in Australian higher education, which are the challenges in the current model of pursuing the broad educational project of forming the whole person. Within a truly Australian collegiate setting, that broader project of forming the whole operates in a number of ways. The first is the power of being part of a community of requirement. Done well, a student being part of a well-defined and intensive high-talent community is an education in itself. There is a requirement to determine how your identity works in relation to the values set by the community, to work with the diversity in every form, intellectual, economic, social background, of course, to different ethnicities. You need to navigate the complexities of the personal politics of organisations of up to 500 people, to understand subtle social rules of institutional life, and to live respectfully with domestic intimacy with people you may still be getting to know. What sets a college apart is that people make a choice to live in this community as an integral part of their life, rather than to attend it as a transactional exchange. The task of running a college well, of course, is to ensure that this community of requirements set requirements that are thoughtful, healthful, and intentional. Now, the second role that colleges play in this wider educational project is, of course, student government. And central to the concept of the Australian synthesis of what a college is about is the role of student self-government. It enables young people to take on the responsibilities of making communities work, and often at scales they will not do until well into their careers. This form of leadership enables people to pursue a wide range of activities from the cultural to sporting to service-oriented that are valuable themselves in developing well-rounded people, but also a vehicle for developing team-based and leadership skills. Of course, there are dangers in this model when student leadership is not accountable to the college community as a community of requirements. When that doesn't happen, when student leadership doesn't match up to those communities of requirements, bad island cultures readily emerge. But that such island cultures could emerge also highlights the substantiveness of the responsibility given to students and the opportunities that are there when it's done well. Finally, colleges, of course, have programs that are explicitly designed to address the wider human development, from educationally focused programs on leadership and ethics and problem solving through life skills and to meditation. Universities of today are not resourced to provide such offerings, and students commonly lack the pre-existing trust-based relationships that greatly facilitate people getting the most out of such activities. It is this broader project of formation that helps explain Newman's observation that a collegiate education sent out people more fitted for their secular duties, which produce better public leaders of the world. Now, putting evidence to such claims, of course, is hard, but a rough proxy, and I don't know the numbers here in Sydney, but I think they would be very, very similar. In Victoria, two colleges, the University of Melbourne, Ormond and Trinity, have between them been the homes for more than half the state's Rhodes Scholars. The unique pedagogy of colleges and their ability to develop the whole person gives them a particular capacity also to address disadvantage, a notion that's always been at the core of this Scottish synthesis, Scottish Enlightenment synthesis of what an Australian college should be about. And the evidence for the power of that synthesis to address disadvantage is compelling. When the University of Melbourne set out to address Indigenous educational disadvantage, it discovered that Indigenous students in colleges studied at vastly greater rates than those outside. Indeed, so much so that their extended bachelor's program for Indigenous students includes as part of its requirement that those Indigenous students are in a college, and the success rate of that effort has been truly impressive. For success beyond university, colleges can also close the tacit knowledge and social capital gap for those coming from situations of disadvantage. To some extent that can occur outside college, of course, but the depth of tacit knowledge creation and social capital formation is an order of magnitude greater in a college setting, and it's that sort of difference that you really need if you're going to level the playing field. Earlier I identified strengths and weaknesses of our higher education system, and here we have seen that with a complementary pedagogy to the Australian University, an ability to broaden the educational project, Australian colleges that reflect the scholarship enlightenment synthesis provide a way to strengthen that system precisely at its points of weakness very significantly. More than strengthening the system of colleges today, though, I think they also offer the universities a strategic edge against an even larger and longer-term danger. Most Australian universities, which are home to the sort of colleges I have been speaking about, would like to remain place-based institutions. Now, without fundamental change in their model for delivering education, it's not obvious that in the long run it will be easy for them to maintain their place-based aspirations. The notion of the lecture as good pedagogy belongs long in the past, and without naturally gifted or well-trained educators who have reason to care deeply about teaching, there is a limited future for tutorials that are larger than many school classes. I had a sense of where higher education could head some years ago when Stanford started putting its courses online before that effort turned into the world of MOOCs. Here I saw a new vision of that educational hybrid that colleges like ours were built on. One of those Stanford courses was a first-year science subject with a curriculum nearly identical to that offered at Melbourne. A group of our students decided they would get together, and instead of joining a massive lecture on campus, they'd find a comfy corner in one of our learning spaces to watch the Stanford version. They stopped the lecture and paused it as needed, discussed the content as a group, and then sought out the college tutor for anything they didn't understand. They met where and when it suited them, they moved at their own pace, and they were through the course about 2/3 the way through a semester. All of them did very well in the assessments, which someone periodically collected on campus, and in the exams. They had taken charge of their learning, pursued a peer-to-peer strategy supported by a tutor, that also utilised the best in lectures that they could find anywhere. They had mastered the domain of content through a whole set of collaborative skills along the way. Given that they were at college for complete education and the rest of its developmental experiences, it was clear to me that colleges had a long future, but less clear that today's university campuses did unless they became more collegiate. And I can see many ways in which that could occur. One way I don't think it can occur is through commercially provided student accommodation. Myself and other Melbourne colleagues have, during our expansions, made use of these providers to house students temporarily, so we have first-hand experience of the best of them that we could find. And I must say, it was quite an education in the gap between marketing and reality. At best, these providers provide a bed and a desk close to campus, and in some locations can make for a modestly more placeful neighbourhood by providing patrons for cheap eats, cafes and 7-Eleven stores. At worst, they create soulless ghettos for students of similar circumstance or ethnicities with little cultural exposure to Australia, a thin experience of community and adequate support in times of need. Now currently, these offerings also need to be recognised as not competitive with the type of student community that is integral to the offerings of many universities in the United States and the United Kingdom, with whom Australian universities compete in the international education market. They do not make us competitive internationally if we're serious about what we offer. Now, faced with these challenges, Australian universities would be wise strategically to strengthen and facilitate the growth of their existing colleges, and to ensure when new accommodation is built, whether by private providers all by themselves, it comes with sufficient common space for community and learning so that these places could evolve into a collegiate type of communities, even if that isn't how they begin. Now, I understand the business model challenges of providing that amount of community space. They're not inconsiderable, but they are challenges that are surmountable. So I've spoken to the way colleges can address two of the weaknesses of the higher education system. I also identified a third weakness, which is the lack of choice around curricula and the type of institution you attend. I think with some ambition of universities and colleges alike, and importantly together, we could change that. I highlighted earlier that essentially absent from our system are liberal arts colleges, a focused technical universities like Caltech, or indeed Ivy League type universities with the educational possibilities presented by only having around 6,000 graduates in total. Take liberal arts colleges. In the United States, they average around 1,500 students. If you could get a few Melbourne or Sydney colleges to work together with their universities, you could create a liberal arts college offering within the university. It could be Oxbridge in style, with the university setting the assessment and the colleges preparing students. You would move away from lecture-based format to flip classrooms, utilising the small teaching spaces colleges have, which are usually underutilised during regular contact hours. There could be innovation around the timetabling. You could move to the so-called block model, where students do one subject or at most two at a time, sequentially through a semester, studying and being assessed at the end of each block. And living together, you could make team-based problem solving a much stronger feature of the way learning progresses. Or there's the Caltech option. You could partner a college with a leading medical research institute that's associated with the university, or strong research departments to create a university within a university. You could have a distinctive cohort of students and staff that were all members of one or a small number of colleges, where the college provided a setting for part of the students' learning program and the opportunity for a much closer relationship between students and staff. Such a focused college would not even be a total novelty to the Australian experience. Think Kendall Hall or Once Upon a Time Dookie, though each of those had their quirks. There are many variants in between. At Ormond, our collaboration with the Faculty of Business and Economics and the School of Engineering to write a home for the University of Melbourne's new Master of Entrepreneurship degree is just one example of what is possible. All the students within that degree are members of the college, very Oxbridge-like. And taking place within our economics, we can deliver the type of highly personalised program in a completely interdisciplinary setting with the flexibility around accessing the entrepreneurial ecosystem that would be hard to do otherwise. It also has the advantage that the program gets intensive management attention rather than being one of many things that are happening, which is very helpful when you're pushing into the innovation space. Another possibility for colleges is to be stronger about their educational philosophy with which they approach the university. They can create a distinctive way of going to a particular university. This would see the university offering or as a platform out of which you can construct a focused offering. This was certainly the case in the early days of the Melbourne colleges, where Ormond's focus on natural sciences, modern philosophy and languages provided a home for students with those interests. Today, we are starting to envisage Ormond as a home for those interested in a genuinely liberal arts and sciences education, where there is a commitment to making the whole of the Western canon available to students, rather than the canon minus virtually every bit to do with Western religious thought and anything incompatible with various ideological renderings of it. You do, however, need to the Australian kind of college model of our Scottish Presbyterian founders to imagine that kind of possibility. You need to be prepared to have a strong sense of your own education agenda within a wider university model. Now, all of these models are premised on the idea that colleges are not entirely self-sufficient places, but succeed through their educational partnership with their university, and that they have a distinctive point of view and capacity independently to deliver on it within an integrated university setting. And unlike Newman, these possibilities only begin with the view that the notion of a choice between a college and a university is a false choice. Only together in that unique hybrid that began with the founding of St Andrews College 150 years ago, can the true potential, I think, of Australian higher education be realised. Thank you.
Are there any questions, ladies and gentlemen? I have one. The idea of collegial framework that caters for 55,000 students at the University of Sydney is a challenge of scale. How do we do that?
So the thoughts, at least in what I kind of presented here, is a full collegiate university at that scale is not possible. So two possible responses to that. One is not therefore to say we won't take advantage of the collegiate opportunity of university within the university model, and where we can create a distinct offering that is available as just that, a distinct offering. I think that's a huge competitive advantage to any university that decided to do that, or the Caltech kind of option, where you say we're going to take a part of the university and accelerate it. And I think if Australia wants universities in the top end of the kind of global spectrum, it's going to have to do things like that. The other piece, I think, is to say, what do we learn from how we make collegiate communities work? The University of Toronto experiments, if you like, with a model of a collegiate university without kind of residence for everyone. And I think that's another model that we need to kind of start to do much more about, as to how do we create cohorts of students who have a place on campus that they can genuinely belong to, that breaks the big university into much smaller parts, and that we invest in to enable them to connect and engage in programs built on that smaller interdisciplinary mixed cohort that we create. I appreciate the funding challenges for that are really considerable given where higher education sits today. But I think they're the kind of things we need to start to experiment with. Because I think the sleeping challenge that I highlighted is that in the end, we develop great research-based universities, or at least a handful of them, with an ever-diminishing quality of student education relative to the demands that the workforce actually has for those kind of students. So I think we've got to start experimenting now. By the time we get there, it'll be too late, and we won't have developed the co-funding models that may well be required to do that. Remember, colleges effectively have invented a pretty clever co-funding model, particularly those that have strong scholarship and bursary programs, where we're effectively enabling that added part to be added on, but with remarkable levels of accessibility where the strong scholarship programs are available. And I think we've learned the lesson from the United States. If you want to be educating at the very high end of the world, then you have to work out how you get more mixed higher education funding systems. And HECS does that in part. It's some form of private money into it, but it's also very constrained in how much and in what ways it can be got into the system.
I'm just wondering how you reconcile your ideas of college as an equitable institution which seeks to rectify disadvantage, as you said, with the cost of college and the cost of attending college. You talked briefly about the scholarships model, and I'm wondering if we could clarify this. I think Ormond's scholarship model is based obviously on merit, as all scholarships are, but also on predominantly on means testing, whereas St Andrews has a solely merit-based system, at least for its more significant scholarships.
Well, I won't choose to comment on how your system works, but only know my own system. I think if we are to be the kind of colleges that can integrate the university, then we have to be able to provide access to ourselves on the same terms effectively as a state-based university is providing access, which means that means can't be a barrier. What we've got to be able to do, though, is address the fact that people genuinely do come with different needs. So yes, at Ormond, our model is, and we very much borrowed the model from American universities, to create a holistic financial assessment of people's needs, and then to package up our scholarships and work offerings to provide a financial package to enable them to attend. And undoubtedly, one of my most important jobs is to continue to raise funds to fuel that. So, and that, I guess, in any setting, is one of the things university leadership ends up needing to do a lot of, because we've got to put a lot of money into that task. I think what we have demonstrated, though, is it's achievable. Alumni, rightly kind of engaged, are ready to support that because they genuinely believe in that vision. And perhaps to add a kind of note to this, I also think there's a sort of urgency in this, because one of the things that through that lens of financial assistance we see is that Australia is definitely getting a lot more unequal because a larger and larger number of people are being left behind. Real incomes for the vast majority of Australians are not increasing, and that means the gap for things that rise in real terms like education is getting wider and wider. And so colleges and universities have a really critical role to play to be putting the rung back in the ladder of opportunity that is increasingly being taken away. So I think this is a critical area for colleges and particularly their alumni, who are the ones who are going to fix this problem, to address. And I know a great many do, and should be thoroughly celebrated for doing so.
The way learning is implemented between secondary teaching and the tertiary institutions, there's quite a disparity between the two, and colleges definitely help with that transition into the tertiary education. How do you think universities can help facilitate that?
Yeah, so I think the challenge, the real challenge is to how do you turn effectively what's a limited amount of time universities can provide for a smaller group teaching, given the way funding works, to make those kind of learning experiences as effective as they possibly can. At the moment, I think we don't skill people particularly. When you think about it, year 12, the person who taught you in year 12 had to hold a pretty sophisticated qualification in teaching and a whole lot of experience in that. They don't get to be a year 12 teacher unless they're really good at it, have domain expertise and expertise in teaching. Less than 3 months later, you're being taught by someone who may have taught before, but never with any formal qualification in how to teach. No particular incentive necessarily to do it really well, and to rubrics that are often unclear, and depending on the system, not with a huge degree of support. Now, universities ultimately, that's got to change. We've got to work out how we create. Now, some universities, of course, everyone would like to do that. It's not a criticism, it's just a constraint of funding. But we do have to actually make a real shift and help those people who become stronger educators. I think we struggle to do it, though, until we recognise the peer-to-peer based nature that university education should be. If the only time you see the people in your tutorial is in the tutorial, you're not going to have a very good peer-to-peer based learning system. And this was Newman's point, and the point that goes right on. You've got to have a sustained community that you're a part of, which you can energise peer-to-peer learning. And that's what tutors really should be playing a much stronger role in doing, is helping you as a community of learners to be much better as a community of learners, supporting, helping each other, learning from each other, to make that process better. So we're going to kind of quite fundamentally change the way we construct university teaching, and that is a generational project.
Rufus, thank you for such a fascinating and insightful presentation. You said there in your presentation that for college leadership, this is precisely not the moment to lose our nerve.
Yeah.
So when I hear that, I assume that courage is one of the core attributes of the leadership, or someone who's leading very strongly the college. What are the other attributes or qualities that you think you see in good leadership in colleges, firstly? And secondly, in your journey as head of Ormond College, and the college has shifted so substantially over the last 8 years, what have been some of your key challenges?
What in that question? Fabulous question. I think there are many models of leadership. So there's always a danger in saying here is the kind of 5 things that make successful leadership, and I don't subscribe to that. I think leadership comes in many different forms. I think there are a few things about college leadership, though, that are perhaps kind of worth because you have to stare down and confront a whole range of views and perspectives that linger from an unhealthy past. Sometimes amongst alumni, sometimes amongst students, and that's not easy because you don't often have a ton of support to do it, oddly enough, but it has to be done. The other thing is institutions like colleges, and we talked about kind of reflected on here, are ultimately built around values. That's what makes them work as communities. And therefore, finding a form of leadership that enables those values to be extraordinarily clear and central to how life operates in those places, I think is critical to the kind of institutional leadership that colleges need to have. Colleges are also deeply community places. So working out what it takes to lead community is very different to the kind of task of managing an organisation. So thanks to an extraordinarily rich experience at McKinsey, I got to see lots of managing organisations. Leading a college is more like being the mayor of a village some days. It's a task that's political, it's subtle, it's complex. You have very few management levers you can simply pull. You've got a bunch of influencing strategies that make it much more like a task of political leadership. And there's little training in doing that with authenticity and integrity in our world today. And so it's a real crucible for forming that kind of leadership. So I think there's some of the things that are important. Values, being very community-centered in the way and recognising that political dimension, and simply being authentic. I think the danger in any leader in colleges is ultimately it is personal leadership, and students have the best detectors of inauthenticity of anybody, and they'll rarely say it to your face, but boy, they say it to each other. If you act in inauthentic ways, you can kind of hear the whispering ball. So you've just got to be straightforward. And I find, in ways that are not necessary in other communities, that perhaps they should be, when you stuff it up, you've got to apologise en masse to them all and say, we got that wrong, and own it publicly. It's tough. Otherwise, they know you're not real. So you've got to do those kind of things that aren't very easy for leaders to do because you risk you lose your authority by doing them. But if you lose your authenticity, you lose a lot more. As to Ormond, look, it's been a unique kind of journey. Every college is different and distinct. I often sort of characterise that all I've really done is to make sure that we took that original DNA, wonderfully kind of progressed by its first master and then by David Smokacki, who I think deeply understood the kind of essence of what I described tonight, and make sure we really lived by it, that we took ourselves back to those essential qualities. And actually, it's a lot of change, but apart from confronting some aspects of the bad island culture when I arrived, which actually didn't take that long to get rid of, and that because they didn't actually represent our DNA. It wasn't what we truly were. Apart from that, the change has not been hard. It's not been resisted. Because I think and I've always, history has been important. This is where making sure people understand this fits with the story of who we are has always been a core part of it. And you sense that tonight. I like going back to the story of who we are and where we come from and what's valuable about that. Because colleges, by their nature, are communities that pass on things from their history. So who owns the story owns the future. And if you've got a good and healthy story, then you've got a fair chance of writing the next chapter in a good way. And that's really what we've tried to do. It all.
A couple of questions. So again, thank you. That was fabulous hearing that history. I learned a lot hearing about all the history of how it's evolved. A couple of questions. One is, I'd be interested in your level as to what the level of bursaries, scholarships, sales, and percentage of revenue you would aspire to provide that mix. So we're probably around now about 20% or 1.5 million scholarships. Would be interested in what your aspiration would be. And the second, I'd love to hear how you think about some student leadership training here, but still, it's probably pretty early because it's evolution. I'd be interested in how you think about that.
Yeah, so two parts. I think there isn't a kind of static answer to the first question. As your community becomes more diverse and socioeconomically grows, so that number grows. Now, it doesn't grow in a straightforward linear way because government support cuts in. The group that we have that raises the greatest need for challenges, the group of Australians just outside needing government help, whose families don't have the means, remotely close to the means, to enable something like college fees to be met. The bigger that portion grows, in Australia that portion is growing, the greater the need to make provision. The other piece is, how much leaks from the system. So the better targeted the financial systems is, the smaller amount of need because less of it's leaking out. So I suspect, at least in our place, and we roughly about the same proportion on a larger base. So each year we have, by our estimates, probably 3 or 4 people who we can't get across the line for out of, incoming cohort of about 170. So we'd like to be able to close that gap, and that probably means, by our estimate, we need to be getting out close to 2 million a year, and 2 to 2.5 million would probably do it. But what our real target is actually close to 3 million because of the level of financial kind of challenge that means people aren't fully participating in university because they are probably doing too much work relative to the full experience of university. So our target is at around 3 million a year, but more or less double where we are today, to ensure that we need access and equal opportunity experience of the university on our current mix. As to developing student leaders, yes, I think this is student leadership requires, I think, a range of support and skill development. So we do, in fact, one of my former, people I used to work with at McKinsey doing leadership development for large corporations helps out our student leadership team with their leadership. And we also do some student leadership work with the kind of people who are coming into student leadership, so particularly with sporting and cultural teams. We give them some support to enable them, so they've actually done some learning before they take on their more college leadership roles. And we really, if leadership is not going well, get leadership coaches in to support them. Navigating student leadership challenges, oh my goodness, can be an extraordinarily high-end task. So it's almost part of the pastoral care to make sure they're well supported, particularly when it gets extra challenging. And thanks to the media and others, that happens more often than is probably fair to people their age. So pretty structured. And then I run most years. I run a leadership program for our later year students, which is semester long.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I was going to say, through the present, because I was thinking, Rufus, as you were speaking, that I lived with my wife Christine in married graduate accommodation on top of Mackay 40 years ago. And I think that must have been serious first for Ormond College in terms of general life around colleges. I suppose I had the largest supplementary question for me to ask whether the Scottish Enlightenment had a religious drive to it, or whether in the end it's turning into a secularity that raises real problematics, let's say, the Church of Scotland today, or the provision of the learned Presbyterian ministry that once graced the world.
Look, I would take the second part. I think it has had a progressive tradition. Davis led that in those times. I think the second part of the question, though, is a really interesting one, because there's no doubt when I look at our history, we were also home for the Presbyterian training, and United Church still has facility on our site, not integrated with the college. It ultimately drove down a much more secular path than one that saw theology as integral to it. And part of our current kind of Strong, who I mentioned tonight, the other book he wrote, which had just got republished a few years ago, was a defence of the Western canon and the need to keep theological material in it. And one of the things that we're recovering is the fact that that Scottish Enlightenment tradition didn't write out all of that material. And in fact, what's happened far too much in university life is that it has ended up being written out. So one of our kind of fine DNA tasks is to find a way within that, open to all faiths and none construct, we can put that material back into the curriculum. At the University of Melbourne, it is startlingly absent. I know it's a little different up here in Sydney, thankfully. We recently did a map of the arts, of the kind of offering across arts-related faculties, and there's almost nothing on anything to do with Western religious thought anywhere in the curriculum. You could pass through the university and barely ever know that material existed, and insofar as you were exposed to it, form a pretty derisory view of it. And I think that's just a grave failure of education that denies students access to a set of ideas, not only to help them understand who they are, but equips them to rebuild a world that needs a lot more of that refashioning. So I think you're right, and it's partly why we've got this current project of figuring out how we intelligently put that back into a trajectory that could otherwise have ended up dangerously kind of secular.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking wonderful challenges there for colleges, this university and other universities. Thank you, Rufus. In response, I hope you'll allow me to use the words of Ormondians from over a century ago, from their address to Harper, when they said, "The practical character of your addresses, the sincerity and soundness of your advice, and the breadth and tolerance of your views have excited our profound admiration." Well, I think you presented a challenge inspired by the opportunity and aspiration, so beautifully articulated, but also informed by our own senior fellow, Professor Ian Jack, when he recently wrote, "On the cusp of its sesquicentenary, Andrews, while remaining intensely aware of its history and its real traditions, has worked hard to translate into modern terms the values which encouraged so many folk to support its initial creation. The challenge, cheerfully accepted by a college, is to maintain this momentum up to the bicentenary and beyond. Friends, are we ready and prepared to accept that challenge to our bicentenary and beyond? I think we've had something of a roadmap tonight, and I look forward to that opportunity to set us on that path. A couple of housekeeping matters to finish. First of all, a clarification from the man at the back with the Scots accent. McIntyre, another McIntyre. The Andrews funding model is actually based on the Ormond model, stolen with appropriate acknowledgement, but with an Andrews twist, which is to continue to reward pure merit with no consideration in about a third of the cases, and about 2/3 is means tested on the base of need. And in fact, we use the same spreadsheet exercise that Ormond teach from the American colleges. We're using it here. So, a couple of housekeeping matters. To the guests we've invited to dinner, please make your way downstairs and into the corridor immediately under the chapel, where name tags and something to drink will be present. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me once again in thanking our Sesquicentenary Lecture.